All right, Jabosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin a good Tavach. Hope that everyone had a beautiful, uplifting, and restorative Shabbos. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. Sorry, let me just thought I had it up. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsor for the month of Shvat, Mrs. Selma Woolf, for dedicating all the Shiurim and drushos this month with immense gratitude for the refuos from Hashem and the merit of a refuah sheleima for all of those in need and the zchus of our brave soldiers and the zchus of the return of all of our hostages. Our week of learning sponsors this week, Dena and Dena Lieblich, in the merit of the safe return of their son, Aaron Daniel ben Frumadina and his entire pluga from Gaza. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH. It's an overwhelming thing for a parent to dedicate for their child. So we hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, that Aaron Daniel, all of our precious soldiers, Emir Hashem, should be successful in all of their endeavors. Should Emir Hashem have tremendous hatzlach in all of their missions, and Emir Hashem should return to their families, b'shalom and b'karov. We also dedicate all of Maseches, Bava Kama Le'ilui Nishmas, Master Sergeant Eliyahu Harush, Hashem Yikom Damo. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH is Neshama have an aliya and his family and Neshama. We also take the opportunity to wish a Mazel Tov to our Chaver Milt Gertner on the engagement of his son. Shru, Mazel Tov, B'meretz Hashem. Should be zocha to see him build a binyan ad a home of Kedusha, home of Hatzlach, a home of Simcha, home of Torah. Ameh v'esim shanim tovos. And also with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Really, really incredible daf, exciting daf ahead of us. Baruch Hashem, today's daf is Pei Zayin, 87. And we are picking up on the last line of Pei Vav Amud Beis 86b, Tanya Idach. So we'll say, remember again, the Gemara introduced us to the concept, ultimately, of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says as follows, Tanya Idach, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Suma Ein Lo Boshes. Ultimately, again, a summa, a blind person, doesn't have boshes. Now, remember, we're talking about over here that if a blind person goes ahead and injures someone, so the blind person is not obligated to pay boshes. Remember, again, just to reorient a little bit how we're in this discussion, our Mishnah spoke about the concept that a blind person, Mishnah said, I'm mavayish es ha'arum, I'm mavayish es ha'suma, I'm mavayish es ha'yashin, the yashin should be eish pata. So remember again, our Mishnah indicated that halacha l'maisa, a suma is obligated in boshes. So then the Gemara said, our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that suma in la boshes, and that was the entire discussion from the two dots up until the last line where we're picking up from. So Tanya Idach, so the additional Bryce explained Rabbi Yehuda Omer Suma in la boshes. If a suma damages someone, then ultimately again he is not subject to the penalty of boshes. Top of Pei Zayin 87a. V'chein Hayir Rabbi Yehuda Potro Mikol Dinam Shebatorah. And similarly again Rabbi Yehuda pattered a suma from all general halachas in the Torah. So in other words, this is not the unique din by boshes, right? This is not a unique din by the payment for humiliation. I will say, I want to point out, it goes without saying, someone who injures a summa is obligated in boshes. When Rabbi Yehuda says summa in la boshes, it means that ultimately if the summa injures someone else, he's not obligated to pay boshes. So the Gemara says, by the way, this is not unique to boshes. Rabbi Yehuda in general exempted a summa from all halachas. My time, we'll say 87, second line, my time of Rabbi Yehuda. What's this Rabbi Yehuda? Amar Kran, the pasuk says, V'shaftu ha'ida. So we'll say the Gemara is talking, quoting the pasuk from Bamidbar. V'shaftu ha'ida, bein hamake u bein goal hadam ala mishpatim ha'ila. So the Gemara darshans as follows. So literally again, the assembly will judge, bein hamake bein goal hadam. So the Gemara says, Kol sheyeshno b'make u begoal hadam, yeshno b'mishpatim. Any person who's subject to makir, we'll say, so makir means the halachas of someone who injures another, right? Gol hadam, remember again, refers to the fact that if Reuven kills Shimon accidentally, so ultimately Shimon's relatives have the ability to avenge the accidental death of their relative. So whoever is subject to these halachas, ultimately yeshno b'mishpatim. So the juxtaposition of the pasuk, v'shavtu ha'ida, bein makir, bein gol hadam, ala mishpatim. So whoever is subject to makir, the laws of injuring someone else, and the laws of Goal Adam is subject to mishpatim, to general halachas. Kol she'ino b'makeh b'gol adam, whoever is not subject to the halachos of injuring another, or ultimately the halachos of gol adam, eino b'mishpatim, ultimately is not subject to the other halachas, and therefore because a summa, a blind person, ultimately is not subject to the halachas of makeh and gol adam, which makes sense, right? The summa can't really be held fully responsible for damages inflicted upon another person. Why? Because halacha l'maisa, he's blind. So therefore, again, there's a certain lack of ability, a certain lack of awareness that he has, and therefore, again, that exempts him on many levels. So interesting drasha. So because Rabbi Yehuda, so because in general that he's pater from makeh, from gol adam, he'll be pater from all mishpatim. So this is the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds. So remember, just to appreciate like the genesis and progression of this discussion, it began in a very localized way regarding boshes. That at the end of the day, so Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, a summa is not chayiv in boshes. So summa injures someone, he is not chayiv in the boshes payment. But the truth is, now we see that this is actually part of a much larger halachic motif, which is that Yehuda holds that a summa is pater from mitzvahs. That a summa is pater from mitzvahs. So we'll say, so here we go. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, summa in la boshes. Summa is not subject to the boshes payment. In other words, he doesn't have to pay boshes. V'chein haya Rabbi Yehuda potro mikol mitzvos ha'amuros b'Torah. And we'll say, here it is, explicitly. Famous shita of Rabbi Yehuda that summa is pater from all mitzvahs. From all mitzvahs. So the Gemara goes right there. Amar Rav Shisha Breit Ravidi. My Talmud Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda hold that a summa is pater from all mitzvahs? What's the pshat in that? So the Gemara says Amar Kra, because the pasuk says ve'ila ha-mitzvos ha-chukim b'ha-mishpatim. These are the mitzvahs, chukim ha-mishpatim. Kol sheyeshna b'mishpatim, yeshna b'mitzvos ha-chukim. Whoever is subject ultimately again in mishpatim is obligated in mitzvos and chukim. Remember again, mishpatim, mitzvos, and chukim really refer to the three different bodies that comprise the totality of Torah. So therefore, again, whoever is obligated ultimately in mishpatim is obligated in chukim and mitzvos and chukim. V'chol she'eino b'mishpatim, whoever is not subject to mishpatim, ultimately eino b'mitzvos v'chukim. And I will say, really, this ties in very beautifully to the previous drasha, because in the previous drasha, Rabbi Yehuda, what did Rabbi Yehuda say? V'shaftu ha'eda ben ha'makeh u'ben goal hadam ala mishpatim ha'ela. In that drasha, remember again, Rabbi Yehuda said, whoever is subject to makeh and goal hadam is subject to mishpatim. And whoever therefore is not subject to the halachos of injuring someone else and gol adam, avenger of blood, ultimately is not subject to mishpatim. Now in pasuk number 2, what does the Torah do? The Torah links chukim and mitzvos to mishpatim to teach you. Whoever is chayiv in mishpatim is chayiv in chukim and mitzvos. Whoever is not chayiv in mishpatim is not chayiv in chukim and mitzvos. And we already saw that a summa is pater from mishpatim from the earlier drasha. So Rabbi will say, this is the famous position of Rabbi Yehuda, that a summa is pater from kol mitzvos ha'amuros b'Torah. Summa is totally pater. So again, I just want to point out the fascinating kind of progression. What began as a discussion regarding boshes, right? We just thought Rabbi Yehuda is going on to say that a summa is not chayiv in boshes, ultimately, again, turns into a much more holistic approach to Summa, where Rabbi Yehuda holds that he's pater from Kol Torah. So we'll say, this leads to a very, very beautiful Gemara. We actually saw this Gemara in Maseches Kiddushin. The Gemara says, Am Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said ourselves, and I will say, important piece of information over here. Rashi points out, Rav Yosef, Sagi Nahar Haba. We'll say, now Rabbi Yosef was blind. Rabbi Yosef himself was blind. Now, the Talmudic term for a blind person is Sagi Nahar. Sagi Nahar literally means someone who sees very well. It's a euphemism. Rabbi Yosef said as follows: Am Rabbi Yosef, Mereish Hava Amina. In the beginning, I used to say, Man da Amar Halacha Rabbi Yehuda, da Amar Summa Pater Min Hamitzvos Ka'avidna Yoma Tava L'Rabbanan. So Rabbi said, this is an incredible Gemara. So Rabbi Yosef said, in the beginning, if somebody would have told me that the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, I would have made literally again a big suuda. Yamatava. I would have made a yamtiv. I would have made a beautiful suuda for all of the rabbis. Why? Why would I make such a big suuda? My timer. Delo mifagdina v'ka'avdina mitzvos. Because that would mean, according to Rabbi Yehuda, I'm not obligated in mitzvos, but I do them anyway. And so I would have felt like someone will say, somebody who's not obligated in something and still go out of his way. Someone says, it's interesting. So Rabbi Yosef said, in the beginning, I really thought that if somebody were to tell me the halachas like Rabbi Yehuda, that I'm a blind, I'm a blind person, but even I'm blind, I still do everything. So that's incredible, because here I am, I'm exempt, but yet I still obligate myself in the performance of the mitzvahs, and I would have thought that is a much higher level. However, the hashta, the shamas lahad Rabbi Chanina. But now that I heard the position of Rabbi Chanina, what does Rabbi Chanina say? Dam Rabbi Chanina, gadol hamitzuva va'osa mimishenu mitzuva va'osa. So Rabbi Chanina said that it is greater, right? Someone who is obligated to do something and fulfills his obligations is even greater than someone who is not obligated but yet fulfills those very mitzvahs. That's gadol hamitzuva va'osa. Greater is the one who is commanded to perform the mitzvah, and in fact performs the mitzvah, from mimi she'enu mitzvah osa, from someone who is not obligated but still performs. So the Gemara says, so therefore it turns out to Rabbi Chanina that there's greater reward for actually fulfilling your obligations than fulfilling things that are not obligatory upon you. So therefore Rabbi Yosef says, Man da amar li ein halacha Rabbi Yehuda, avina taval rabbanon. Then I will say, then I would make a yom tov if you tell me the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because if the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, that means a summa is chayiv. A summa is chayiv in mitzvahs. So therefore I will say again, if a summa is chayiv in mitzvahs, if you're chayiv and you fulfill the mitzvahs, then what? There's even more schar. My time, what's the reason? Dechi mafkedino isli igratfei. Since I'm obligated, ultimately, again, there is more reward. So also, we've spoken about this concept before we started in Kiddushin. And again, it's a very profound and insightful idea. In general, people do not like to be told what to do, right? The most common first word amongst children is no. Now, I'm sure the speech therapist will say it's monosyllabic, right? It's there's a lot of reason. But I will say, but like on a deep hashkafic level, there's a very good reason for that. Because at the end of the day, and this is, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh writes about this, the concept that we are made with Selma Elokim, in the image of God. And what makes HaKadosh Baruch Hu unique is that he's confined and constrained by nothing. No one could tell the Ribono Shel Olam what to do. So because we are made in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's a very strong piece of that resides inside of me. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do. And the moment ultimately that you tell me what to do is the moment that I'm going to push back. I'll just tell you, I mentioned this many times in the past, but it bears repetition. Here, Chaim Shmulevitz, zechus in Sichos Musar, brings down the episode of David HaMelech and Shimi ben Gera. You know the story, when David decides to flee from Yerushalayim instead of fight against Avshalom. When his own son rebels, he won't fight against his son. So as he's fleeing Yerushalayim, so Shimi ben Gera, who was a cousin of Shaul, comes out, greets David is the wrong word. He starts spitting at David, cursing David, throwing rocks at David, essentially saying you get exactly what you deserve. Exactly what you deserve. So David's generals wanted to kill Shimi ben Gera. David said, leave him alone. Fast forward a little bit. David's on his deathbed. He calls in Shlomo, gives Shlomo a number of instructions. Amongst the instructions, he says, deal with Shimi ben Gera. That's deal, right? Like deal with Shimi ben Gera. Okay, David dies. Next episode, Shlomo calls in Shimi ben Gera. We know the story. He tells Shimi, here's the deal. I'm giving you a palatial estate in Yerushalayim. You never have to work another day in your life. I'm going to support you at the king's table, right? Sign me up for that, right? Go ahead. About one condition. What's the one condition? You are never allowed to leave Yerushalayim. And the moment that you leave Yerushalayim, damecha barashecha, I'm going to kill you. That's it. That's the deal. I don't know what to say. That's a sweet deal. That's a very sweet deal. Palatial estate in Yerushalayim, right? No, you're supported by the king. Spend your life on Ruchnis in Yerushalayim. Incredible. Next parak, what happens? The Navi says, one of Shimi ben Gera's slaves runs away. Shimi gets on his donkey, goes, pursues the slave outside of Yerushalayim, leaves Yerushalayim. Shlomo summons him. Shlomo says, we had a deal. Executes Shimi ben Gera. Chaim Shlomo says, obviously Shlomo had a plan. He recognized what was going to happen. Why? Shlomo says something so beautiful. He says, Yerushalayim Yirah Kodesh is the most wonderful place to be in the world if you want to be there. If you're there of your own volition. But if someone else is forcing you to be there, then it becomes like a prison. And it's only a matter of time until you find a way to flex your own muscles of self-autonomy. I will say that's the pshat in the Gemara over here. See, we often think that going above and beyond and doing things that you are not commanded to do, not obligated to do, like that's the pinnacle of personalistic accomplishment, but it's not true. Why? Because I will say, by definition, when I have to do things, there's a piece of me that does not want to do it. Why? Don't tell me what to do. And even, it sounds strange to say, but I sometimes even have that feeling towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Don't tell me what to do. You're God, that's fine. I know you're God. Right? You stay there, I'll stay here. Hashemayim, Shamayim, Hashem, Ha'aretz, Nasan, Bnei Adam, right? You leave, you have your space, I have my space. Don't tell me what to do. Both say, how else? It's good to be honest with each other sometimes. We'll say, how else could we explain the fact that there's something called Shulchan Aruch? And Shulchan Aruch has halachas. And yet, many of us don't keep all the halachas. How do, just rationally, all of us have that. All of us have that. How do you explain that? How do you explain the fact that there's a book of laws that comes from God, and God tells me what to do, what not to do? How do I explain that I don't do some of the stuff in there? How do I explain it? I'm not talking to him, I'm talking to myself. Right? How do I explain it? It's very simple. At the end of the day, don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do. I know it sounds ridiculous, like when you articulate it and verbalize it, but l'maisa, that's it. That's it. And that's what Rabbi Chanina was saying. Rabbi Chanina was saying, at the end of the day, when you do the things that are incumbent upon you, that is the pinnacle of accomplishment. Doing stuff that you're not commanded to do, we'll say, that's easy. You know why it's easy? Why is it easy? It feels good, right? You're like the hero. You're the hero. When you go and you do the stuff that's not obligatory upon you, when you do the stuff that's above and beyond, you do this, you volunteer here, you do this, right? You pitch in here. Again, that's the heroic stuff. Everybody feels great about being the hero. But when you do the stuff that's incumbent upon you, day in and day out, no one's giving you a shkaya. Oh, you made it to me? Oh, wow, incredible. Let's get the art scroll biography team at your living room, right? Like no one's saying that. Oh, you gave Meiser from your earnings? Oh, wow. Big stuff, right? You chose not to fight with your spouse? Oh, wow, mamish. Let's say, there's no accolades. There's no recognition. Right? There's no, YouTube short, that's going viral over that kind of stuff. Right? No one sees it. No one knows it. And that's why sometimes it's so hard. But I will say, but that's the pinnacle of accomplishment. When I show up, and I do the things that I am supposed to do day in and day out, the things that are obligatory, the things that in my mind I'm saying, I don't want to do this, and stop telling me that I have to do this, and I do it, that's greatness. That's greatness. I will say, I saw something beautiful last night. The Shlah Kaddish brings down that this is the source for why we make a Seudah by a Bar Mitzvah. Right? Why do we make a Seudah by Seudah by a Bar Mitzvah? Because when a young man reaches the age of Bar Mitzvah, he's obligated now. So Lamaisa, we celebrate obligation. Why? I bet the kid was doing all these wonderful things before he was Bar Mitzvah. That's fantastic. But he wasn't obligated. Now that he's obligated, and now that Yetzer Hara kicks in to say, come on, say no, flex your muscles of self-autonomy, only do what you want to do, and reject the stuff that you don't want to do. But we say to this Bachar Bar Mitzvah, we have confidence that you could live up to your obligations. That's why the Shlah says, that's how Shlah Kodesh brings down, that we go to make such a big deal, make such a big Seudah around the Bar Mitzvah. Incredible. Today for Rabbi Yehuda Paskins, the Halacha Ma'aseh Sumas Pater. So Rabbi Yosef says in the beginning, if someone would told me the Halacha like Rabbi Yehuda, I would have made a Yom Tiv because I thought I was the man, doing stuff that I'm not obligated to do, but doing it anyway. And now after Rabbi Chanina, that it's even greater to go ahead and do the stuff that you're obligated to do. Then if somebody's one of the halachas, not like Rabbi Yehuda, I would go ahead and I would end up making a tremendous Seudah for them. Incredible Gemara. Plus, I just also mentioned on that Gemara of Suma Ein Laboshes. There's I think a very, by the way, Dovi Elman, you could use that Vart, the Yam Shel Shlomo for the Bar Mitzvah, right? This is, I'm sorry? Yeah, Baruch Hashem, no, it's yours. So, I'm sorry? No, they want to. First of all, it's not mine. It's the shlah. It's the shlah. Also, everybody forgets most stuff about 5 minutes later. So don't worry about it. You're good. You're good. So just one more piece on this. One more piece I will say, and the suma in laboshes, I think is also a really important life yisod. What does it mean suma in laboshes? So literally translated, in other words, the way we had it over here is that a blind person is not obligated for the payment of boshes. But what it also means is in life, a lot of times people do things that upset us, that offend us, that embarrass us. So it's tempting in those moments to go ahead and respond. One of the best things you could do in life is be a summa. If you could make yourself blind to like a lot of the stuff, maybe even deaf sometimes also, to just a lot of the stuff that people do and a lot of the things that people say, in laboshes, a lot of stuff in life will just roll off you. One of the most important things in life is kind of be able to tune out and tune off, right? Because if you ingest, on any given day, someone's going to say something insensitive, someone's going to do something insensitive. Maybe they mean it, maybe they don't mean it. I'll be done the zchus that they don't mean it. But it's so easy to just get caught up in all of the emotional garbage that goes on around us all of the time. Sometimes you just make yourself a summa. You make yourself blind to a lot of the things happening around you. In laboshes, I'm not upset, I'm not embarrassed, I don't get weighed down, and instead I could just focus on the things I need to accomplish. Mishnah. So remember again, the Mishnah contrasts ultimately again, damage is done by a person and damage is done by a shar. So the Gemara says as follows: this is a chumrah that an adam, a person who damages, has over a shar that damages. Right? When an adam damages, he's chayiv in all of different buckets of damages, 5 different buckets: nezek, tsar, ripui, sheves, boshas. Furthermore, mushalim d'nei velados. Mushalim d'nei velados means what? So remember again, that means that halacha l'maisa, if Ruvain injures a pregnant woman and she miscarries, so Ruvain is chayiv not only for any injuries to her, but is also liable for the lost pregnancy. So the Gemara goes right there. The shar ena mishalim ele nezek. On the other hand, if my shar damages someone, I'm only obligated in nezek damages. Upater mi d'mei velados. But I'm exempt ultimately again from any loss of from any damage, loss of the pregnancy. So again, if my shar chas v'shalom damages a pregnant woman and she miscarries, I am not liable for that. D'mei velados. So the value of the miscarriage is only liable when a person damages, not when a shar damages. Next, hamakeh es avives imovelo asaben chabura. This is an interesting case. If a person, let's say Ruvain goes ahead and hits his father or his mother, but did not make a chabura. Now, also, we're going to talk about this, that there is an isur d'oraisa to injure your parents. Not only is there an isur d'oraisa, there's a chiyuv misa, death penalty, if a person injures their parents. But only if the injury causes a wound. Let's say a person hits their parents, but it doesn't cause a wound. Or, v'cholva b'chavir b'yom kippurim. Or, for that matter, a person injures, right? Ruvain injures Shimon on Yom Kippur. Rabbi said the reason the Gemara chooses Yom Kippur is because Yom Kippur, remember, causing a chabura, drawing blood from someone, is an isur da'araisa. It's the isur of shchita. So if you go and you draw blood from someone on Yom Kippur, there's a chiyuv kares. Generally, Rabbi say the concept kimle b'drabimine means that when you simultaneously incur capital punishment and monetary punishment, then what's the halacha? The capital punishment sets aside any monetary judgment. That is only true with the misas beis din, not true with kares. So therefore, again, on Yom Kippur, if you incur kares, you still incur financial liability. So that's the case over here of Ruvain injuring Shimon on Yom Kippur, where even though there'll be a chiyuv kares, if he draws blood, there'll still be monetary obligation. Hachovel, so everyone say same idea. If you injure if Ruvain injures his father Yaakov, right? Ruvain injures Yaakov, and let's say Ruvain doesn't draw blood. So in that case, there's no capital liability, and therefore what? There will be financial liability. Incredible. I mean, not incredible, but you understand. Hachovel be'eved ivri, chayiv b'kulon, chutz min sheves. What's another interesting case? If you injure an eved ivri, so ultimately, again, you're chayiv in all the different buckets of damages. Because remember, again, an eved ivri is a Jew. So therefore, I'm chayiv for damaging another Jew, except from sheves, lost wages, bisman shehu shalom. All right, so that makes sense. In other words, that like if the Eved Ivri is mine, my Eved Ivri, and I damage my Eved Ivri, so I'm going to be chayiv for 4 out of the 5 buckets of damages, because Lamaisa, again, I've injured another Jew, but not for Shevis, not for lost wages, because remember, again, he's working for me. Hachovel be'eved kinani shalacherim. What happens if I injure someone else's Eved kinani? Chayiv bekulon. Then ultimately, again, I am chayiv ultimately in all the buckets of damages. Obviously, that goes to the master. Rabbi Huda says, "Ein la'avadim boshes." Rabbi Huda says, "There's no boshes payment when it comes to avadim." Cheresh shota v'katan pigi asarar. We'll go through each of these categories in Mishnah. But cheresh shota v'katan is actually interesting lashon over here. Pigi asarar means that your interactions with them will only have an adverse impact on you. What does that mean? Because achovo bahen chayiv, if you injure a cheresh shota v'katan, you are liable for damages, but yet vehem shechavlu ba'acherim p'turim. We'll say this is fascinating, right? So cheresh shota v'katan, if you damage them, you're liable. If they damage you, they're all pater. They're all pater. Which makes sense. We'll say why? Because remember again, these are individuals who lack capacity. So because they lack capacity, therefore there's no legal liability. So if they damage someone, there's complete exemption. But if you damage them, there's complete liability. Incredible. Ha'eved va'isha pigi asara. We'll say if a person injures an eved or an isha, right? So an eved or an isha, pigi asara, the interaction is negative. What does this mean? Ha'chovel bahem chayiv. If you injure an eved or an isha, if you injure them, you are chayiv. The damager is chayiv. But yet if an isha or an eved injured someone else, ultimately they're pater. Now, both say, now, why are they pater? Rashi says over here something fascinating. Eved v'isha shechavlu b'achirim peturin she'ein lahem ma l'shalim. Because sometimes, again, these individuals will not have their own property. They have their own property. Now, both say, now, what's interesting about, we'll get into this more. The eved, I understand. The isha is a little bit more complicated, right? Because an isha could easily have property, right? But remember, again, also we're going to see sometimes the challenge with the woman's property is that although she retains title, remember again, over the course of the marriage, usage is often given to the husband. So we have this interesting relationship in her property. But again, we'll watch this. Aval Neshama la'achar zman. But I will say, the common denominator between Eved Kinani, right, and an Eved Ivri, or an Eved and an Isha is what? When an Isha, let's say, is divorced or widowed, she will have property. And when an Eved is emancipated, he also will have property. There's a concept of Ha'anaka, that ultimately the master gives him stuff upon emancipation. So interestingly enough, when the Mishnah says that if an Eved or an Isha injures someone, they're pater, really what it means is like this. They're pater for now, but there's delayed liability. In other words, that ultimately when they come into money, when they do have assets, ultimately they will be liable to go ahead and pay. Very interesting. We'll talk about all of this, obviously. This is what you see over here. Let's say the woman gets divorced, so therefore now she gets back her property, or the Eved is emancipated, chayav and l'shalim. At that point in time, ultimately, again, they are going to go ahead and be chayiv to go ahead and pay, because now they have property. Okay? If, let's say, Reuven injures his father, injures Yaakov, and there is a wound, he draws blood. Shabbos says, so in that case, again, there's a death penalty now. Or Reuven injures Shimon on Shabbos. He draws blood on Shabbos. In which case, Shabbos say, once again, there's capital liability for Shabbos desecration. So in both of these cases, now that there's a death penalty, Shabbos say both of these cases are going to be where Reuven's put to death. So because Reuven's going to be put to death, therefore what? Kimlei b'drab minei, and therefore halacha l'maisa, we set aside financial liability. Ha'chovel be'eved kinani shalo pater mikulon. We'll say if a person goes ahead and injures his own eved kinani, he's going to be pater ultimately again from all of the buckets of damages. Incredible. Okay, so we'll say let's begin. So we'll say the Gemara now asks. Interesting that the Gemara chooses to pick up with this question as opposed to first going through the Mishnah. But let's begin with it. So here's the case. We'll say Reuven injures Shimon's minor daughter, right? Shimon has a daughter who's a kitana, right? Remember again, kitana, ultimately below the age of 12. So we'll say, so now Reuven injures her. who gets the damages? Who gets the damages? So look at Rashi. Bebas kitana shalachirim chaval lami gidola vaday didahavia. So we'll say, remember again, if she's a gidola, then what? Obviously, she gets her own damages. The shaila is Ruvain injured Shimon's daughter, who's a kitana. Who gets the damages? Bless you. The Gemara says as follows: Mi amrinan kevan da'akni lerachmana shevach nu'urim la'av chavala nami davuahavi. So we'll say, on one hand, we could say like this. The father, when it comes to a ketana daughter, bless you, when it comes to a ketana daughter, the father is entitled to what we call shevach nu'urim. Any of the financial benefits that accrue to her when she's a ketana. We'll say the paradigmatic example of this would be what? Kesef kiddushin. Kesef kiddushin. Right, that ultimately, again, she gets betrothed. Man gives money for kesef kiddushin. The father gets that. Or, again, she works, right, there's earnings. So any shevach nu'urim ultimately go to the father. So do we say maybe damages is just like shevach nu'urim, and therefore Allah should go to the father? The Gemara says, Kevin Dach Marshav Nurim La'av, Chaval Nami Davu Ahavi, my timer, the Afchisa Mikaspa. I will say, because, and there's a compelling reason also to say, because just as the father gets everything, so to speak, that she generates during her Kitana days, so maybe over here he should also get her damages. Furthermore, her value is depreciated. Right? So because her value is depreciated now as a result of that injury, again, that impacts the father, so perhaps he should get the damages. The other possibility is Shevach Nu'urim Huda Akni Leirachmana. The father is entitled to what we call Shevach Nu'urim. So he's entitled ultimately again to what we call money generated during her Ketana days. Because the Torah gives that to him. Why? Because remember again, the father has complete autonomy over his Ketana daughter. B'haraya, he has the ability to marry her off to anyone. Even a guy who's a mukashchin. Mukashchin means like he's covered in boils. The point is, the fact that he can marry her off to anyone, including someone who is repulsive, at the end of the day indicates that halacha l'maisa, he has control over her monetarily. And however, we could say, aval, chavala, kevan di'i by misvilba, lo matzi chavala, lo kanyi le'rachmana. On the other hand, I will say, maybe when it comes to chavala, to damages, maybe the father doesn't have rights in that. Why? I will say, does a father have the right to injure his minor daughter? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So what the Gemara is suggesting is like this. Maybe the only time he has financial control over her are in areas ultimately, again, where he has general control. So, for example, of course he's going to get her kesef kiddushin. Why? Because Lamaisa, at the end of the day, he has the right to marry her off to whoever he wants. Maybe one could even make the argument again for earnings, because he has the right to put her to work however he wants. But maybe when it comes to damages, because he doesn't chas v'shalom have the right to damage her, therefore perhaps he's not entitled to damages as well. So we'll say, so that's the shaila. So Reuven injures Shimon's minor daughter, who gets the damages. So we'll say, Amud Beis. Amrlei, see, responded, Lo zachsa haTorah la'ab ela shevach nu'urim bilva. So also, remember again, this was the question Rabbi Lazar posed from Rav, and Rav responds, no, father does not get damages from his minor daughter, because again, the Torah only gave the father what we call shevach nu'urim. We'll call it like positive earnings, positive proceeds, but does not give the father damages. So the Gemara says, Eisvei, is the kasha hachova le'eved ivri chay bekulon chutz min hasheves bizman shu shalom. Yet also we learned in the Mishnah that if a person goes ahead and injures his eved ivri, he is chayiv in all buckets of damages, with the exception of sheves, with the exception of lost wages, when the eved belongs to the damager himself. Now, both say, what does this have to do with our sugya? Take a look at Rashi, second line from the top of Rashi. Chutz min hasheves bizman she'eved shalom. V'lo be'eved da'acher denosin shiftol rabo katani nihas de'eved ivri shalo pater holu ma'isi yodav shalo v'achinami kevan debito masa yodav shalo lishkol shebach dida. The kash l'rav. So we'll say, here's the problem. The problem is in the same way that if I injure my eved ivri, I don't have to pay sheves. Why not? Because I'm entitled to his earnings. I don't pay sheves. So we'll say the same logic would dictate that halacha l'maisa, a father is entitled ultimately again to his daughter's earnings, right? And therefore, halacha l'maisa, one should make the argument that therefore he should be entitled ultimately to her damages as well. So this is a kashan Rav. Abaye modeh Rav b'sheves d'maisi yadeh ad shas bagros tavu ahavi. So we'll say inachinami. So Abaye says Rav would agree with sheves that inachinami, any money that she would receive for lost wages, those would go to the father. Right, but remember, we're not asking about sheves. What are we asking about? Nezek. We're asking about damages. But inachinami, Rav would agree that the father of the ketana is entitled to sheves. Okay. Eisvei, Gemara is another kasha. Hab chovel bibino gadol. So we'll say, so remember again. So right now, here's what we have. We have the position of Rav who says that halacha l'maisa, if Ruvain injures Shimon's minor daughter, right? So now there's nezek, there's damages. Shimon, the father, according to Rav, does not get damages. Right? Does not get damages. Damages, I guess, will go to the girl herself or put it in escrow or something. Right? But Lamaisa, the father does not get nezek. Why? Because the Torah only gives the father of a ketana what we call shevach neurim. Shevach neurim, which means it was literally, again, the proceeds of youth, so to speak. So again, kesef kiddushin, earnings. But what that does tell us is that when Ruvain injures the minor daughter of Shimon, if there is sheves, if there is lost wages, that the father does get. So no nezek, yes sheves. That's the position of Rav. Eisvei, Gemara is another kasha. Hachova b'bino gadol. If a person, actually interesting case, if a person injures his adult son, what's the halacha? Yitin lo miyad. You have to pay it. In other words, injuring your adult son is like injuring any Jew. It's like injuring any Jew. Ultimately, again, who you're obligated to pay. The Gemara says, "Bibno katan ya'aselo skula." It's interesting. What happens if you injure your minor son? So we'll say, what's the halacha? Ya'aselo skula. Skula literally means a trust. A trust. In other words, we'll say, you have to pay the money, but because he's a katan, you don't want to give him the money in hand, so you create a trust for him in which you deposit the damages. Okay? Hachobel bebito kitana. What happens if one injures his minor daughter? Pater, he doesn't have to pay anything. Furthermore, if others go ahead and injure her, they're obligated to give her father the money. Now I will say, what does this sound? They're obligated to give her father what? Damages. Right? So I will say, so what do you see from here? So this is a kasha on Rav, to which the Gemara says, no, hachanami b'sheves. It's not talking about nezek. Rather, what payments are you obligated to give to the father? Sheves, ultimately, again, lost wages. Now, I will say, we're going to talk about this a little bit. Seemingly, the logic, when one injures his minor daughter, the reason why Bipashtos, ultimately, again, he's not obligated to pay. Again, we'll see the halacha l'maisa, but why he wouldn't be obligated to pay is because since he's entitled anyway to any of her earnings, so Bipashtos, again, there's no financial liability that he would have towards her. That's what it sounds like over here, even though the Gemara is reframing this to mean not nezek, but rather only sheves. So now we're going to pick apart this brayso a little bit. Here we go. Ubimno gadol yitin lo miyad. Suppose remember again, the brayso said that if you injure your adult son, then what's the halacha? You have to pay him immediately. So is that true? Or the Gemara is a kasha chovel bebanav ubibnosav shalachirim gidolim yitin lahem miyad. So we'll say the brayso says that if you injure other people's children, other people's adult children, then what's the halacha? You have to pay them immediately. I will say you've injured other Jews, other adult Jews. Of course, you're obligated. Okay, kitanim. We'll say what happens if you injure other people's children and they are kitanim? Yaseh lahem sgula. Ultimately, again, you can put money in the trust. Put money in the trust. Now watch this. Here's the kasha. Bebanav ubnosav shelo pater. Ultimately, again, I will say, but if you injure your own children, then what? You're pater. Okay, so this directly contradicts what we just saw before, right? The Gemara just said before, if you injure your own adult children, you're chayiv to go ahead and pay immediately. Now the Bryce is saying, if you injure your own children, you're not liable to pay. So how do you reconcile it? So it's a very interesting lokasha. Kan kishe smuchim al shulchano, kan kishein smuchim al shulchano. We'll say, interestingly enough, what does it depend on? Ultimately, again, are you supporting them or not? There was actually just a fascinating article in the Wall Street Journal right, about how the financial umbilical cord for adult children keeps growing longer and longer and longer. Right? Just an interesting idea. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, it depends. I mean, David, listen up to that one, right? You're making two consonants now. And listen, so now the Gemara says as follows. So it depends, ultimately, again, are you supporting your children or not? Right? Are they somech hashchan? So the Pasha, the Gemara seems to say is like this. If you're supporting your kids, your adult children, so then there would be no liability for damages. If you're not supporting your adult children, i.e. they're financial, right, they're independent, then ultimately, again, injuring them is like injuring anyone else, in which case you would be obligated to go ahead and pay. That's b'pashtos what it sounds like. Again, we're going to further develop this more. So the Gemara goes back to the Gemara says, okay, so now what you're telling me, Rabbi, is that the earlier brisa we quoted, right, the earlier brisa we quoted, that said that if you injure your adult son, you're obligated to pay. So I will say, so now you have to set up that case as she'ein smuchin al shulchano. So that must be talking about a case where I'm not supporting my adult son, and therefore if I injure him, ultimately again, I am obligated to pay. Here's the problem. Ihaki, look at the end of that brisa. So this is the previous brisa. Ihaki, ema seifa. Look at the end of the brisa that says, hachovel bebito haktana pater. That same brisa said that if I injure my minor daughter, I'm pater. V'lo'od, furthermore, ela achirim shechavlu ba chayavin litain la'aviyah. Furthermore, it said that if other people injure her, ultimately, again, they're obligated to pay me, the father, damages. But I don't understand. If we're talking about a case of einan smuchin al shulchano, that children are not being supported by the father, and even in the case of the minor daughter, she's not being supported by her father, then what? Who should damages go to? Lidida baile mesavla de baye mizone. We'll say, then again, damages should go to the daughter. In other words, if a father is not supporting his minor daughter and someone injures her, why would the father have any rights in those damages? Damages ultimately again should go to the daughter herself. Furthermore, even according to the opinion that says that a man has, right, the master has the ability to say to his servant, "Asei ve'eni zancha." So we'll say there is this concept that a man can say to his Eved Kanani, right, go ahead and work for me, and I'm not giving you any food. I'm not supporting you. Right? Why can you do that? So the Gemara says, Hani mili be'Eved Kanani da'amar, because we'll say this is only by an Eved Kanani, because the master can say it. And we'll say first white line, da'amar lei, avid avideta kuliyama, uliarta zil sechar va'achal. Because we'll say the master could say to the Eved Kanani, listen, you'll work by day, and you'll go around collecting at night. Right? And Eved Kanani has that capacity to do that. Aval Eved Ivri, that's when it comes to an Eved Ivri, Dichsid, Kitov lo imach, where the Rabbi said there is a heightened level of obligation that a master has towards his Eved Ivri, because the pasuk says, when the Eved Ivri is with you, Kitov lo imach, it has to be good for you with him, good for him with you, in other words, you have to treat him well, Im chabamachol, im chabamishta, lo. So we'll say, so remember again, you have an obligation to support your Eved Ivri, but don't have an obligation to support your Eved Kanani. As long as the Eved Kanani has the time to go out and fend for himself, technically speaking, you could say to him, work and I'm not feeding you. It's not good, but technically speaking, you could do it. An Eved Ivri, you're not allowed to do that. With an Eved Ivri, ultimately there's an obligation to make sure that he has everything he needs to eat, everything he needs to drink. And I will say, if that's true with an Eved Ivri, alachas kama v'kama lo kol shekain bito. All the more so, ultimately, again, with one's daughter. So therefore, I will say, if you're going to have a scenario where halacha l'maisa, the father is not supporting his daughter, which technically speaking he has a right to do, which we'll discuss, but l'maisa, then she definitely gets to keep her damages, right? Because again, how else is she supposed to support herself? So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, "Amar Rava breid Rav Ula lo nitzracha ela lahadafa." Now, what we're talking about over here, not the primary amount that she would need in order to support herself, but rather what? Hadafa. We'll say hadafa ultimately means what? Hadafa means the amounts extra. So when the Brisa says that ultimately, again, it goes to the father, then again, that's talking about additional amounts above and beyond what is necessary for her support. So the Gemara says, okay, fine. So we'll say, so now how are you setting up the second Brisa? Bismuchin al shulchano. So we'll say the second Brisa, which says that what? Which says that halacha l'maisa, If you injure your own children, then ultimately, again, you're going to be pater. In other words, when we say pater, you don't have to pay damages. How are we setting that case up? That's talking about a case where you're supporting them. So because I, the father, am supporting my adult children, I'm not going to be chayiv in damages towards them. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, right? So Gedolim yitain lahem miyad, kitanim yaseh lahem skula. So both say, so then I don't understand. If it's talking about a case then where other people injure my adult children who I am supporting. So the Brisa said, if other people injure them, ultimately, again, if they're adults, you have to pay them immediately, right? Give them damages. And if they're children, you put the money in trust. But why? Amai la'aviyem bailamisi. Both say, if these kids are being supported by the father, then what? Who should the money go to? The money should go to the father. So why does it say that by Gedolim, ultimately, again, the money goes to them? And by Ketanim, you put it in trust. It should all go to the father. Amri, ki kakapis. So both say, it's very interesting. So both say, so now the Gemara really highlights something very interesting. So the Gemara says, in general, Amri ki kakapid, when is the father makbid? That any, so both say, remember, we're talking now over here a case of a father supporting his children. So both say, so therefore, in a general idea, if a father is supporting his children, what that's going to do is, halacha l'maisa, any monies that come in are going to go ultimately again to the father. When is the father makbid that monies that come in go to him? B'midi takachaser. B'midi da'asir alma lo kapid. Shabbos say ultimately again, when is he going to be makbid? Ultimately in areas where he has a loss, where he's out money. But in money, right? That regards. So if he's spent monies on, let's say, on their support, and halacha l'maisa again, now monies could come in to cover that amount. That's where he's going to be makbid that the monies come to him. But money that comes in, well, I guess what we'll call, for lack of a better term, like found money, like damages, which again, the father was never out that money. That's not an expenditure for him. He's not makbid, and he's fine with the kids keeping that money. And that's why the Brisa says, for adult children, you'll pay them directly, and ultimately, again, for minors, create a trust. I want to say, what about when a child finds something? When the child finds something, in general, again, I will say, the parent, if the father is supporting his kids, who gets that found object? Who gets that? The father. And I will say, that's an example of an item, ultimately, again, it's literally, it's found, right? It's found. It's not coming out of the father's pocket. It doesn't represent any expense that the father has been burdening, but yet the halacha still is that it goes to the father. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Amri, Ravcha de ka'asilei ma'alma, v'leslu tzara de gufayu bigava kapit. So I will say, in general, so if the child, the adult or minor children who are being supported by their father, if they find money or money comes to them, right, even if that money is coming from an external source and is not really representative of any money that the father has laid out for them, and they have not had any pain incurring that money, that's when the father is makbid. That's what? The money comes to him. Right? In other words, you didn't earn it, right? Nothing bad happened to you. It's found money. I'm supporting you. The money should come to me. Aval chabala de isbu tzar de gufayu ume'alma kaasi me'alma kaasi lo kapid. But I will say ultimately again with injuries, damages. We remember again, how did this money come about? As a result of pain and suffering suffered by the child. So even though it's quote unquote found money, halacha l'maisa, because it came about because of the injuries or the suffering of the child, the father is not makbid that money comes to him, and the father lets the kids keep that money. So therefore, I will say, even in the second brisa, we remember again, we're talking about a father supporting his children. And the brisa said that if someone injures the kids, if they're adult kids, give them the money immediately. Right? Give them the money immediately. If they're children, create a trust. But the father's supporting them. Why doesn't all the money go to the father? Because essentially, I will say, the principle is that if money comes, found money that comes as a result of the personal pain and suffering of the children, the father's not makbid on that. The father says to the kids, you keep that. Found money that doesn't come through pain and suffering, that the father is makbid on, that ultimately, again, that money becomes his. Really interesting. I baha hasam. We'll say, what about the case of the kitana daughter? Ve'isleit sara de gufa ome alma ka'asila. So we'll say, so the case of the kitana daughter, right, where someone injures her, so there is tsar, right, and the money is quote unquote found money. V'kakapid, right? We'll say, yet the father is makbid, because what did it say by injury, right, by damages to a minor daughter? Diktani v'lo od ella afilu achirim shechav luba chayavin litin la'aviyah. So we'll say, so I don't understand. Here's the case of the kitana daughter who's injured by someone else, and yet what's the halacha? You pay damages to the father. So we'll say, see, here's a case ultimately of found, quote unquote, found money, where there is tsar, yet we say that the money should come to the father. Amri hasam de gavra kapdanahu. Wow. So I'll say, this is very interesting. What are we talking about in this case? Of a father who's a bit difficult. Right? The father himself is a kaptan. Father is a kaptan. In other words, the father is the kind of guy who ultimately, again, just wants all of the money. Just wants all of the money, even in a case. So I'll say, so in other words, what we just espoused before was the principle for normal people. Right? So we'll say, so normal people, in a normal case, at the end of the day, even if I'm supporting my kids, if there's found money, but it's found money as a result of pain and suffering that they've endured, keep it. Keep it. If it's found money and there's no pain and suffering, if I'm supporting you, I'll take it. So there is another category of people called kaptanim, right? The kaptan is someone he's makbid. So what's his hakpad Rabbi saying? If I'm supporting you, then what? Anything that comes in is mine. But what about your pain and suffering? That's fine. I support you, and therefore any monies that come in as a result of you, whether they come with pain and suffering, don't come with pain and suffering, ultimately come to me. There is such a person like that. And therefore, again, a person like that, the Gemara says, look, a father has the right. If he's the one supporting the kids, he has the right to decide what comes to him and what doesn't come to him. So if he's the kaptan, then einachinami again, he can go ahead and get the money. So the Gemara says, Amri hasam davar de kaptanahu, daha in smuchin al shulchano, afilu b'midi di asilei me alma kapid. Hacha, the lav gavra kapdanahu, da smuchin al shulchano. So we'll say, so again, so the Gemara just points out over here, we're just dealing with different personalities. Right? If there's a gavra who's a kabdon, then ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, even if he's not supporting his kids, he still may demand the payment that's coming to his minor children. Right? But I will say, but ultimately, again, in the case of a gavra, in the case of the lav gavra kapdonahu, tasmuchin al shulchano, I will say, in the case of a gavra who's not a kapdon, he's supporting his kids, ki kapid, b'midi takachasrele, b'midi di asalehim le alma lo kapid. So I will say, so again, everything is going to depend really on the personality of the individuals. You could have a gavra who is a kaptan, and he'll be a kaptan even in a situation where he's not supporting his kids. Yet halacha l'maisa still may demand that certain payments for minor children come his way, versus another individual, ultimately again, who's not a kaptan. And this kind of person, even though he's supporting his kids, if the money is found money and doesn't come through the pain and suffering of his children, of his minor children, he'll take it. But if it's found money that comes with pain and suffering, then ultimately, again, he'll allow it to remain the possessions of the children themselves. Incredible. We'll say, let's just go a little bit weiter, and we'll stop for today. We'll stop over here. We'll pick up in Be'eretz Hashem. Yeah. All right, let's go a little bit weiter. Just have a fighting chance of maybe staying on target this week. We'll say, so let's just get, there's a 2 dots from the top of the next time, let's get to it. My skula. So we'll say, what's a skula? What's the skula? So we'll say, remember again, the halacha was that for minor children, if you injure them, the halacha is you have to create a trust. What's a trust? So we'll say, this is so beautiful. Rav Chisda Amar Sefer Torah. This is so beautiful. What do you do? So if you injure a minor child, right, and now so you have to pay damages. So how do you pay the damages? What do you use the money with? You buy a Sefer Torah. I will say, now why is the Sefer Torah called the trust? So first of all, 2 things. Number one is the Sefer Torah itself has a value. So, and I will say, what is the beautiful part about Sefer Torah? I will say they only appreciate. So first of all, you're putting your money into the most solid investment that exists. So number one, you're putting the money literally, so now the money isn't an object, Number two, the child, him or herself, could also use the Torah to learn. Right, so now I'm doing two things for this child. Number one, securing the money in an actual item, and number two, something that ultimately, again, the child himself could learn. I will say, what an incredible idea! I will say, the greatest investment in the world is Torah. The greatest investment in the world is Torah. Which I will say, why? You think about it for just a moment. I will say, you come, right? Any other investments, what do you have to do? You have to check it, right? Is it up? Is it down? Is it going well? Do you have to move your money? I will say, when you invest your time and your energy in Torah, there is a guaranteed ROI, right? The return on investment is always incredible. What's the return on investment? Twofold return on investment. Number one, a really great day in this world, and a beautiful portion locked in for eternity in the world to come. I would say, good investment, right? The best investment, I would say, that's Torah, is the greatest skula both in this world and the next. Incredible. So Rabbi Ravuna Amar Dikla, this is interesting, Rabbi Ravuna says, invest the money in a palm tree, right? Date palm. Why? The Gemara says, the achal minei. Date palm is also good, right? Because a palm tree is an asset, and at the same time produces fruit. And also, I've seen many times the Gemara speaks about the incredible power of dates, right? Dates have the ability to go out and satiate, and they're generally relatively inexpensive. So I will say a good musra also about how to conduct ourselves in Olam Hazeh. Don't develop expensive appetites, right? Expensive appetites, I will say, that's the problem. That's the problem. It's kind of, there's like, we all had our experiences like this, where you experience something that you always thought was a ridiculous, unnecessary luxury, then you have it, and then once you have it, you cannot live without it. It's the worst thing in the world. And you look back like, I wish I never experienced that. Life was so much simpler before that thing. So the Gemara says, invest in the date palm, right? Because it gives the kid, again, you have an asset, you have the dates, and an incredible musr as well. Keep your tastes in life simple, and you will be able to maintain happiness at a reasonable price tag. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "V'chein amar Reish Lakish lo zachsa Torah li'av ela shebach neurim bilbad." So we'll say, so again, Reish Lakish says the Torah only gave the father. Back to our original discussion. Shebach neurim bilbad. Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu pitzia. Rabbi Yochanan says not true. Even if the girl suffered an injury, ultimately, again, the father gets damages on. Now, remember, there are two different words usually used for an injury: a patsa, or ultimately, again, a chabura. Chabura generally means the type of injury that diminishes the value. Pitzia is like an injury, but it's an injury on a covered part of the body. It's an injury that no one knows. The injury doesn't have an effect. So the Gemara says, really? A father gets damages for a pitzia? So the Gemara says, afilu Rabbi Lazar lo kami bari le ela chabala tapa pechas da'af chisami kaspa. Even Rabbi Lazar only had his issue regarding a chabala. Because by a chabala, ultimately, again, her value is diminished. But ultimately, I will say a pitzia, which doesn't diminish her value. Why would a father be entitled to anything? Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina shepatza bifaneha va'af kasa mikaspa. Rabbi Yossi, what are we talking about over here? A pitzia on her face. So that is visible. And because it's visible, that absolutely can have an impact ultimately again on her value. Such a pitzia like that, which Rabbi Yossi could diminish her value, ultimately father is entitled to. So Rabbi Yossi, we'll stop over here for today. Here's what we left with. So a lot in this Gemara. So Rabbi Yossi, what we still have to see halacha l'maisa is what is the father entitled to and what is he not entitled to. What we know for sure he's entitled to is what we call shevach nu'urim. So that'll be earnings, wages, kesef, kiddushin. What it also seems like everyone agrees that he's entitled to is what? Shavas, lost wages. What we're not clear about, to both say, are other things like nezek, right? Nezek, tsar, the other buckets of damages. Ultimately, again, what is the father entitled to? Similarly, again, what we also have to resolve is halacha l'maisa. When is a father entitled to damages from his children? But now we have two different categories of that: minor children and adult children who you are supporting. So what level of entitlement does a father have to all those buckets of damages? Imraz Hashem will say the Rambam tomorrow. Bosai, Shkoyach.